Hey friends, I hope you're having a wonderful Thanksgiving. Hey, I just wanted to share this brief message before we begin the call with our friend Andy Hoffman. And this comes from John B. Whitehead over at Rutherford Institute. He posted a terrific piece called This Thanksgiving, Let's Say No Thanks to the Tyranny of the American Police State. And he begins with this quote from Daniel Webster. Hold on, my friends, to the Constitution and to the Republic for which it stands. Miracles do not cluster, and what has happened once in 6,000 years may not happen again. Hold on to the Constitution, for if the American Constitution should fail, there will be anarchy throughout the world. And it's clear that he's right. It's also clear that there are powers aligned against the Constitution that want to bring us into a global government, which of course will erode what liberties we have left. And so John's article begins, Thanksgiving is not what it once was. Then again, America is not what she once was. Americans have become so enthralled by the bread and circuses of our age, tables groaning under the weight of an abundance of rich foods, televisions turned to sports and entertainment spectacles, stores competing for Black Friday shoppers, and a general devotion to excess and revelry, that we have lost sight of the true purpose of Thanksgiving. We must fight for the Constitution, my friends, because if the American Constitution should fail, there will be anarchy throughout the world. I hope you have a great day with your families, guys, and God bless on this Thanksgiving 2015. And now here's my conversation with Andy Hoffman.
Look, they are desperate. Trust me, there's far more going on behind doors than they're telling you about.
Hey guys, thanks for tuning back in. I really do appreciate it. We have back on the line a truth teller and friend SGTreport. It's Miles Franklin's Andy Hoffman. Andy, how are you?
Doing great, doing the rare afternoon interview, so we're trying to get recalibrated in our minds after a long day.
Yeah, we're both sort of morning guys, and that's typically when I like to record my interviews, but we're pulling this one off in the afternoon. But I think that's good because we can see how things have lined up here over the course of the week. We've got an absolute collapse of the global economy. And you know, Andy, I wanted to kick this off by starting with the Baltic Dry Index. You and I have talked in the past about the harbinger of doom, which is Caterpillar. The other harbinger of doom has got to be the Baltic Dry Index, hitting an all-time low. Am I right?
Yeah, I mean, it's actually just symbolic of everything that's going on. The Baltic Dry Index, obviously, it measures freight, transportation costs and volumes of seaborne shipping around the world. And yes, this week it hit an all-time low, but more importantly, it hit the all-time low 2 months before the seasonally weak first quarter. You never see this kind of plunge this time of year, which shows you how weak things are. But it's not just that. The Chinese Containerized Freight Index, which kind of measures the same thing, but only for China to Europe routes, it's fallen 70% in the last 3 weeks, 70 to an all-time low. And everything else, and it's not just overseas. You look at what's going on here. The railroad freight loads are down. The trucking load factors are down. Everything is down. Wherever you look, everything's down. Corporate earnings are down. For all the people are trying to hype up the stock market and trying to find a reason. Even the S&P 500 is admitting this is 3 quarters in a row of negative earnings growth, and this was the worst earnings growth of the 3 quarters. And of course, we now have more goosed accounting gimmicked goosed earnings than we've ever had before. In fact, because of all the debt finance buybacks, the earnings per share is masking the fact that earnings are falling even further than earnings per share. So again, you look across the board and everything is as bad as it gets. But nowhere more so. Forget shipping indexes than the CRB commodity index, which just broke below its 40-year low last week. That's 40, not 14 or 4, which is pretty impressive of a feat, given that that's when the gold standard was abandoned and they started printing money. So even with all this monetary inflation, you've had such a collapse in demand, or more importantly, oversupply, because of all the money printing that has financed so much ill-begotten production, like shale oil producers, that we have. To me, and I was a commodity analyst for many years, this is, to me, by far the biggest oversupply in the history of the world, of commodities, of infrastructure, of everything, of governments themselves. So I don't see anywhere for these things to go but down until they're ultimately hyperinflated away.
You mentioned the fraud in the stock market. I wanted to ask you, did you notice the other day, did you see when Macy's stock nosedived? There's all the talk about these buybacks, right? I love what these executives are doing now. They're buying back their stock hand over fist year after year, and then enriching themselves with bonuses through stock options. Because of course, by buying the stock back internally, they're driving the prices higher, and it just seems like Ponzi fraud. And maybe we're starting to see that play out with Macy's. I think it was down over 13-15% in one day the other day, and Zero Hedge wrote a bit about that and about the fraud, all these buybacks, right? They're goosing their own stock prices, and it's just in concert with the Fed and these 0% interest rates, and I think that's how they can afford to buy their own stock.
Well, yes, it's the cancer that money printing and Wall Street. It's financial engineering plus money printing. They're partners in this crime of the century has done, because what they're doing is they're incentivizing corporations not to invest in their companies,
Right.
but to invest in their stock, and they're doing it by borrowing money at record low interest rates to buy back that stock. Of course, that's killing the companies. That's why Macy's is falling apart. The actual company is falling apart. That's why their stock plunged, because no matter how much stock they buy back, the earnings is plunging much further than the share count. And we've had record buybacks in the last year or two. In fact, that's been by far the biggest reason why the stock market has gone up at all. Well, that and the PPT, which is supporting what they're doing. But now that all these corporations have a record amount of debt and the earnings are plunging, and all these schemes that were created by Wall Street, such as these debt finance share buybacks, of which IBM is the poster child of how it's failed, are falling apart. Valiant Pharmaceuticals is another perfect one. The growth by M&A via debt. All these, you see these mergers like, Dell is buying EMC, or, the Budweiser merger, all these things. Just absolute, what they're doing is borrowing junk bonds to finance these things, and now they're all falling apart. It's part and parcel of how, as you said, a Ponzi scheme falls apart. The only way to keep it going is to print more money and try to hold everything up, which is exactly what they're doing. We are seeing unprecedented manipulation of markets. I've been talking about not just stock markets now, but all markets. I wrote 3 or 4 months ago, I wrote the Eastern Point of No Return, when it became obvious that the Chinese have joined the U.S. in manipulating their stock market every day. And now you're seeing these, like today, the copper PPT, as I call them. They took copper up 4 or 5% in 1 minute because it's falling apart, because Glencore is falling apart. Yesterday, the Asian version of Glencore, Noble Group, was put on credit watch by S&P. They're going to be downgraded to junk within a few weeks. I mean, it's so obvious what's going on, but it's not working. The only things that these guys have been able to hold on to, to keep the veneer going, has been what I call last to go markets. The Dow Jones Propaganda Average, not ever allowed to fall, ever. And paper, gold, and silver, not ever allowed to rise anymore. But everything else they're losing control of. No matter how many copper PPT surges come in, copper is at a 6-year low, zinc's at a 6-year low, oil's at a 6-year low, and everything keeps falling. Commodities of all sorts are at or near all-time lows. Currencies are at or near all-time lows. Economic activity. And we haven't even talked about the geopolitical ramifications that are coming into play because of all this. All these wars that are breaking out, particularly what's going on with ISIS, in which you now have us and Russia and France and now Turkey. Everyone's involved in the Middle East. And, it's ironic. It's almost like they want a war just to try to get the price of oil up. As opposed to the Iraq war, we wanted to prevent it from going up. So, right now, as far as I can see it, there's a historical disconnect between the reality that several financial markets are saying and the fundamentals behind them. But then again, most of them, in most cases, economic Mother Nature is decidedly winning the war.
Well, the other place that economic Mother Nature is winning the war, and talk about something I'm happy to see crash, let's talk a little bit about Obamacare. The nation's biggest healthcare provider, United Health Group, may be bailing out of Obamacare soon because they can't afford to stay involved. And I just love it, Andy, because it's got to start driving home the point for these Keynesians and these uber liberals that think you can just give away everything to people who don't have it. Because here's the situation where they wanted to promise health care to everybody. And you know what? I'm not against that idea. I think it would be great if everybody could be insured, but the question at the end of the day is who's going to pay for it? And Obamacare is a fraud, and this can't go on, and hopefully it'll collapse under its own fraudulent weight.
Yeah, well, and it's not just Obamacare, it's all these entitlements. And who's going to pay for Medicare and Social Security? I mean, they're all going bankrupt themselves because, as, what was it, Margaret Thatcher that said, once it's socialism, once you run out of other people's money, that's it. Obamacare was by far the most, ambitious of all these programs, and it's having the biggest near-term impact. But it's the entire system of entitlements that can only be financed by money printing, which ultimately causes hyperinflation. In the case of Obamacare, I mean, you can read all my articles, starting with the one I wrote about a month ago that's called Obamacare, the bullet to the head of the 2016 economy, because you could see, as you said, the Obamacare itself is really just starting. I mean, remember they delayed the government mandate, the corporate mandate until next month, by the way. That's when corporations are going to have to really start laying people off. But, all these things are just going into effect now, and people like me are seeing 20-30% increases in rates. Some are seeing more. These exchanges are falling apart. The healthcare organizations themselves are losing billions of dollars, and we're just in the first year or two. They're going to have to. It's going to be the equivalent of like 2008. The Fed is going to have to monetize Obamacare because it costs so much money, and it's either going to be higher taxes or higher inflation that's going to, that we're all going to get for this. And of course, we have worse health care, and no one wants to be a doctor. So that's just one aspect of how inflation is decidedly more than people say. And in fact, if anyone caught it last week, Vice Chairman of the Fed, Stanley Fischer, as in part of this desperate propaganda scheme to try to make people think that they're going to raise rates in December so that they have some kind of credibility, he said inflation is a lot higher than you think in a moment of weakness. In other words, he's admitting what we've been saying all along, that they've been lying about inflation, and that GDP is way overstated because et cetera, et cetera. So again, the walls are closing in around the powers that be that are trying to manipulate. All they got left is a couple of last-to-go markets. And right now, with the political landscape around the world, I mean, look what's going on. Portugal, Greece, Spain, Brazil. I mean, all these places are falling apart because they can't handle all the debt and all the economic weakness.
Andy, I just did an interview with Dr. Paul Craig Roberts, and, of course, I think he's one of the greatest truth tellers on our side that's out there. I really respect the man a lot. And at the end of the interview, I asked him about the economy, about the Fed, about the future of the dollar, and I asked him if he thought the Fed had already hyperinflated the dollar. If you look at that Fed monetary base chart, it's a chart that shows hyperinflation. I mean, the hyperinflation hasn't technically hit the system. His response was that they kind of have this thing stitched together. And the way that they have it stitched together, and maybe in his words, even have it under control, is through the gold and silver manipulation. As long as they can endlessly manipulate gold and silver, this paradigm will go on. And I guess it gets me back to the all-time lows. You said it in the commodities. The enemies of truth and freedom would, of course, say, well, and that's why silver's so low, because it's just an industrial metal. Never minding the fact that there's all-time investment off-the-charts demand for precious metals, for silver specifically. India's going to take down 33 to 40% of the world's silver supply this year. It's out of control, but they won't tell us that. What do you make of what Dr. Roberts said about that, though? As long as they can manipulate the gold and silver markets, they'll keep this thing stitched together.
Well, I mean, I disagree. I agree in the fact that I just said that paper gold and silver are a last to go market because it's the canary in a coal mine type thing. Yeah. And so is, for instance, the Dow and the major industrial averages. I mean, look what happened, when the Shanghai exchange was collapsing this summer. I mean, it caused even the Dow to fall and made it difficult for them to hold it up, which is why, of course, China had to, do the same thing that we do. Which is goose it every single minute of every day. But the fact is, just because they've been able to hold a couple of things up doesn't mean they're holding everything else up. And again, overseas, gold and silver are doing fine, particularly gold. In many places, it's at an all-time high or very near it, including some, first world countries, as they say, like Canada and Australia and Japan. I'd be thrilled right now if U.S. gold were only 15 or 20% from its all-time high, or in Japan's case, 12%. Or in South Africa, it's at a new high, or Brazil, or Russia. The BRICS that are supposedly taking over the whole world, et cetera. So no, they only have the handle on a few things right now, But most things they have lost control of, including gold prices in most other countries, and certainly commodities, currencies, economic activity, political stability, social stability around the world. They've lost all of those things. So I would disagree with, well, if they just hold gold price down in U.S. dollars, that everything's gonna be fine. And again, as you say, the problem with gold and silver is it's not a paper market like the Dow. They can't do the opposite of hyperinflation, meaning like take it to nothing, because we've already had major shortages in these metals, and we're going to have more going forward. I mean, right now, unequivocally, 2015 will be the all-time high demand level for both metals, which is going to break last year's level. It is not going to be the all-time high level for base metals, that's for sure. And the argument that silver is just industrial metal is a joke to begin with. Silver has like a 95% directional correlation with gold, and it's probably more monetary for the amount of people that use it that way than gold even is. So no, I disagree that they can keep things going this way. They have kept things going as long as they have by manipulating markets, but the rubber's hitting the road economically. They are losing control of a lot of other markets, and eventually they'll lose control of the last to go either. In gold and silver's case, I have no idea what the paper price will do. I know that the real stuff you won't be able to find it. And with the Dow, either they'll hyperinflate it or it'll crash, but you lose your money in real terms either way.
Okay, Andy. Well, one last question for you. I want to talk to you a little bit about that Fed emergency meeting that happened on Monday. But first, a little background. My friend, brother John F., did a really fun video, a really good video about that meeting coming up. He did that video last week, and it was called Bring It. And, the bottom line on his video was, if the Fed wants to get together and pull another 2008 on us, if the bankers eventually want to pull another 2008 on us and say, you know what, if we don't do X, the economy collapses. If we don't get another bailout, the too big to fail banks will go down. And to every one of these points, Brother John said, bring it. Those of us who are prepared are tired of this crap. They want to crash the economy? Bring it. They want to bring down the big banks? Bring it. They want to try to crash the dollar? Bring it, because we cannot continue to bail out these criminals. So I guess my question is, what do you make of this quote-unquote emergency meeting that took place on Monday?
Well, the first thing I'll say is they no longer have the power to do anything. They certainly can't threaten anybody with stuff like that because all those things have failed. I mean, there wouldn't even be a will to get anyone to agree to anything like bailouts. What they've been doing for years now is doing it covertly. They were deer in headlights, the government and the Fed back in 2008, and that's why they were so clumsy with their let's ask Congress to do a TARP bailout and beg them. Now they just do it all behind closed doors. Of course they're still QEing like mad. Even their own balance sheet admits it hasn't changed. It's still sitting at an all-time high. Of course they're QEing right now. And as far as the stock market, of course they're monetizing stocks. Look, I mean, I've been writing about it every day about the same. Today was a perfect example, a perfect dead ringer algorithm with nothing but bad news everywhere and global stocks falling. I mean, you can't make this stuff up. But right now, all they can do is hope and pray and jawbone and do whatever they can to pray that something good happens, which will never happen. It's kind of like in Titanic, waiting for the absolution that will never come. As far as this meeting, I don't want to say emergency meeting. The Fed had on Monday, meaning a couple of days ago, this expedited meeting, which they did on purpose so they don't have to disclose the details in minutes like they do their regular meetings. So there's a lot of speculation why they would do that. It says in their press release that they're doing it to discuss, interest rates, meaning the decision to do interest rates. So people are saying, well, does that mean that they are getting ready to make a premature decision before the December 16th meeting? It's hard for me to believe that, given that all the Fed cares about is the stock market. As long as the stock market's up, they feel confident and they pretend they're confident, which is why, for instance, in their October 28th meeting, even though the global economy was in full free fall stage at that point, they took out the clause in their FOMC statement saying we're worried about global events. And the reason they're not worried, because the PPT goosed the stock market up 2,000 points so they can pretend they don't care. So I can't imagine we're going to wake up tomorrow or Monday and they'll say, yeah, we're lowering rates because the economy's gotten worse. because the stock market hasn't gotten worse. So, but why they're doing it, I don't know. But I could tell you this much. If they are having emergency meetings that they don't want you to know what's going on inside them, obviously something is bad.
Yeah.
It's like, the European Union had a secret meeting the other day, all the countries, about getting rid of passportless travel. I mean, this is why the European Union is going to fall apart. I mean, it's incredible. Look, they are desperate. They're behind doors. This is a perfect example of where they're actually telling you they're behind doors, but trust me, there's far more going on behind doors than they're telling you about.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I've always said that too. I've been saying that a lot lately. The things going on behind the doors at the highest levels of these banking establishments, at the central banks, at the Federal Reserve, Jamie Dimon over at JP Morgan, the manipulation of the metals over at the Treasury, trying to keep track of this, 18.5 trillion in debt and raising the debt ceiling to 19.6 trillion. And I mean, it's got to be absolute chaos behind the scenes. I mean, literally, just you mentioned the Titanic.
Iceberg, right ahead!
It is the Titanic, and they're trying to keep the Titanic from running into an iceberg.
Yeah, they're trying to maintain a status quo that can't be maintained. And again, for the people that are worried, oh, this will never end, I'm trying to say, but it is ending. First of all, if you live outside the United States, in many cases, it already has ended for you. Everything has collapsed in a lot of places around the world, from commodities to currencies to social situations, employment, all those things. And it's happening here too. Just less so because we still have the reserve currency, which has muted, the issues here. But of course, the U.S. economy, even by what they admit, is as bad as it's been at any time that we can remember. And it's only going to get worse from here, which means that the central banks and the politicians are going to continue to do everything they can to mask the problem by lying and, of course, by manipulating markets. And it's just not going to work. And ultimately, the big canary in the coal mine, which is the physical gold and silver market, will ultimately be one of the things that contributes to their demise.
Well, okay, Andy, I'm going to wrap it up by saying this, because I've said this a few times lately. I'm going to say it again. You just sparked a thought by telling us how bad it is in so many other countries. By comparison, we're still in pretty good shape here in this country. It's a real blessing to be able to get silver at, $14-15 an ounce, because by my math and John Williams' math, that puts it about $2 an ounce in $1980, okay? It's a bargain, and we're really lucky in this country to be able to buy it and not have to pay a VAT tax on top of it. Silver's just a real bargain here, Andy. Why don't you tell people how they can get it through you guys?
Yeah, and again, you are blessed that you can buy it now, because in most of these countries in the world, you can't buy it at all. I mean, in Brazil, you can't buy silver. Are you kidding me? In Mexico, they're having a hard time buying silver right now. And by the way, the Mexican peso is collapsing also. So yes, you can still get it here. And remember, be warned, we had, our biggest shortage since 2008 this summer. And the way things are going right now, I wouldn't be surprised if we have a new, even worse one sometime soon. So again, Miles Franklin, we've been around 26 years. Give us a call, 800-822-8080, or email me at ahoffman@milesfranklin.com.
Yeah, stand-up guys over there at Miles Franklin, guys. First purchase of silver I ever made was 100 ounces, 10-ounce bars, and I purchased that silver from Miles Franklin. Andy, thanks so much for joining us today. We really do appreciate your expertise and insights as we document the collapse.
Oh, I appreciate it. You too, Sean.
All right. Thanks, buddy. And guys, thank you for tuning in. We appreciate your support at SGTreport.com, thelibertymill.com, and thephaser.com. Real news 24/7. God bless.